Feeling triggered layer. Layer lowdown. Oftentimes, individuals with autism have things that trigger or really bother them. Sometimes these triggers can come from not feeling understood. It is important to show people the same level of understanding that you would want if you're dealing with a situation. It's also important to remember that when you try to help someone, rather than say the first thing that comes to your mind, think about how to say the same thing but in a more calm and caring way. The last bit of the slowdown here is understanding that a problem that may seem small to you may not seem small to everyone. It is important to understand and respect that. Into the layer. I spoke about minimization last time in my book, Success from the Middle. But now I want to apply it to what I discussed in the memory layer. Minimization, in this sense, is downplaying the severity of someone's problem. This happens when someone, especially someone close to you, talks about something that is really bothering you as if it's not a big deal. And oftentimes, whether intentional or not, makes you feel bad for being upset about the problem. I want to circle back to my story about Mitch from the memory layer. The degree of emotional pain I felt from that situation was something I would not wish on my worst enemy. As horrendous as my pain was from knowing Mitch had the impression of me that he likely had, it still wasn't the worst pain from the situation. The worst pain was how people around me were addressing it. Counselors, social workers put all their energy into telling me to leave Mitch alone. But there was little to no empathy towards how I felt and why I wanted to talk to him so badly. The same can be stated about my family members. Some of the students from my high school that tried reaching out to Mitch on my behalf became tired of how much this was bothering me. They didn't understand how important it was for me to reach out to him and explain myself, which resulted in some very hurtful comments being said to me. I don't fully blame them. I kept pushing them to try and help me solve this situation, even though they didn't want to, which wasn't fair on my part. I don't even fully blame my family or the counselor or social workers. Their intent was to keep me from getting into trouble, which was their primary focus, since Mitch was likely feeling harassed. I can only imagine the vast majority of people would have had similar reactions like Mitch if they were in his shoes, just as the people trying to support me would in that situation. Of course, 8 years later, I understand what I did was wrong. I also realized that other people's perspective of my actions led to why they acted the way they did. Not that I see myself as bad because of it, but at the time, it didn't feel wrong. I felt like I was trying to right a wrong because all I wanted to do was say sorry for the Jason story and explain my intentions. But whether back in 2016 or in 2024, the one person I never blamed for any of this was Mitch. I just really wanted him to understand where I was coming from. And even though I felt right in my actions back in 2016, I was still placing myself in everyone else's shoes. But circling back to what I said before, no one was trying on my shoes. The emotional pain I was going through got very little validation and understanding. I was basically just the bad guy, cut and dry. That's really what started to push me to not want to eat, resulting in the loss of 26 pounds. It was also a big component of why I wanted to hurt myself so badly. It wasn't until one person, who I will mention later, for an important reason, started to understand me and validate my feelings about this, that I slowly started to feel slightly better. It was also because of the outpatient program. They didn't encourage me to try to continue to reach out to Mitch to fix things. However, they really went out of their way to see the situation from my perspective and try to relate to my feelings. This is what really gave me a boost to get back on track. Instead of saying, "Shame on you," 1, they validated the fact that this was the closest to an authentic friendship I ever had. 2, they validated my intentions for reaching out were just to settle a misunderstanding. 3, they validated that I looked up to Mitch and his likely negative view of me caused an imbalance in my life. 4. They validated the trauma I felt when the school asked me not to speak with him anymore. 5. They validated the fact that I felt lonelier than ever before. 6. They validated the fact that I didn't feel that I had the ability to ever make friends now, considering I had made such a nice kid like Mitch feel the way he felt. Slowly but surely, with the methods I had learned to use, I started to steer away from wanting to fix the situation and misunderstanding with Mitch. But to this day, the pain still persists. Will I ever make things right with Mitch? I don't know. Only time can tell. But what I do know is that things could have gone really bad for me if it had not been for the one mystery person I will talk about soon, as well as the outpatient program. No one else at that time was able to do for me what they did. With respect to minimizing, that's also another thing that took place. Some examples. Other people have it much worse. My personal favorite. Man up. Just let it go. Just move on. It's not that big of a deal. Just forget about it. In short, these comments made me feel even less supported and understood because they made light of my situation. Full disclosure, I know I haven't spoken about my family in the best light yet in regards to this situation. Allow me to be blunt. I've definitely had many issues with my family. For the purpose of this book, I won't go in depth with them. That being said, for the most part, they are light years ahead of where they were back in 2016 in terms of understanding me. It's not perfect. I know that no family is perfect, so no one needs to bring that up. But I do appreciate the extra effort they are putting in, and I love them deeply for that. Friends reading this book, I'm sure at times you have received minimizing comments, and perhaps you may have used some of these yourself at some point. Here's the thing. Despite how much this situation with Mitch bothered me, I'm sure it can be hard for most people to empathize with my feelings about it, even today, and it wouldn't be fair for me to fully blame them. So let's take some time to make the concept of minimization more relatable. A few years back, a chart was presented to a group of students I used to work with about the size of the problem. Small problem, medium problem, big problem. The chart suggested the appropriate length of time and intensity of reactions to various problems. For example, when you have a small problem, you should only be upset for several minutes and then move on. When you have a medium problem, you should be upset for a few days and then move on. And a big problem may take a longer period of time to process. In many instances, I'm sure a lot of us can say this is how we react depending on the size of the problem. However, what constitutes the size of a problem, huh? Well, in the presentation, an example of a small problem was losing a cell phone. An example of a medium problem was the loss of a pet. An example of a big problem was the loss of a person. I'm sure there wouldn't be much argument against the big problem scenario, but let's talk about the other two. Let's start with the cell phone. According to the chart, for anyone that loses their cell phone, with all the information, pictures, and so many other important things, apparently it's not okay to make a big fuss about it for more than 10-ish minutes. I'd be curious to see who can follow through with that. For anyone that loses a pet, despite many people's pets being just like family, in some instances, their only family, apparently, after a few days, we just have to move on. Listen, I used to be a leader for an organization called Chicago Cares before the pandemic. And one of the projects I led was a pet therapy project. Volunteers would bring their pets to a senior home to visit the residents and provide fellowship. I can almost guarantee that if any of those pet owners lose their pets, it would be something they could not move on from after a few days. Even on social media, I see people grieving over the loss of their pets as if they were immediate human family members. I'm sure many of you reading this book would feel the same. By the way, I don't discount anyone that uses the size of the problem concept because I understand the mindset behind it. The intent is to make sure people aren't having extreme reactions for situations that don't warrant it. Now, Unless you're part of the special needs community in some shape or form, the verbiage of, is this a big problem or a small problem, likely isn't in your lingo. But the quotes I mentioned earlier that were stated to me for my situation with Mitch might be more familiar. Let's add a few more scenarios into the mix and see how minimization can take place. Needless to say, anything I say in response to these scenarios is me playing devil's advocate to a fault. Scenario 1. Imagine we are in a polar vortex and the temperatures in Fahrenheit are in the single digits or lower for the next 7 days. Not totally unrealistic in Chicago. All of a sudden, the heat goes out at your house. For whatever reason, you have nowhere else to go, and the heater can't be fixed until the weather gets better. Maybe a massive, relentless snowstorm is taking place, which again is not unrealistic in Chicago. That's a pretty messed up situation to be in, right? No, it's not. There are people who are in the streets right now and barely have access to warming shelters. What's the big deal? What about the people in Yakutsk, Russia, whose average temperature in the winter is well below negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit? It can get as cold as single digits even in October. Their summers are so short, you're complaining about a few days of cold. Get over it! Scenario 2. You just got into a major car accident. You are in critical condition, but you just barely make it. However, you find out you are paralyzed from the waist down and will have to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. You become emotionally depressed and just want to give up on your hopes and dreams. What are you complaining about? At least you're alive. What about the people that don't make it after car accidents? Can you still see? Can you still hear? Can you still talk? There are people in the world that don't even get that, and you're complaining because of such a small situation. Grow up. Scenario 3. You just suffered a really bad breakup or even a divorce with someone you really cared for. You feel lost and empty. You feel that you'll never be able to move on. You cry profusely. I mean, this is someone you've been with for years, and you sacrificed so much to make the relationship work, but it just didn't. That's life. Deal with it. Some people never find love. Quit crying about it like such a baby. There are people out there that are starving and don't know when their next meal will be. There are people out there that are in hospice because of a terminal illness. You're complaining about a little breakup. Suck it up, move on, and go find someone else. Jeez, making a big deal out of nothing. I can imagine most people wouldn't have these extreme reactions towards someone going through these things. They're pretty intense, right? Intense is the key word here. What determines how intense something is? Who gets to make that determination? Just because a situation may seem trivial to you, that doesn't mean it's trivial to the person experiencing it. People always talk about how there's someone in a worse position than you are, no matter how bad your problem is. This is true. Okay. So are we going to keep one-upping each other and making light of another situation? I can guarantee you that anytime you talk down to someone about their situation, although it may seem insignificant to you, think about when you have a big situation. Yeah. There is someone out there who has it worse. They can minimize your biggest and most painful situation and make light of it. And how would that make you feel? Indeed, there are benefits to having the knowledge that someone out there has it worse. It's important to be grateful for the things that we do have. Many people don't enjoy the things we take for granted every day. Things such as shelter, clothing, eyesight, hearing, companionship, and so on. And oftentimes reminders are necessary so we can focus on what we do have. But there's a time and there's a place. Bringing to light the things someone should be grateful for should not be done in the moment something happens or during the time period of peak depression in which someone is going through a hard time. Also, it should absolutely never be done as a means of making light of someone's situation. Of course, there are times when I might compare someone's circumstances to another's, even to my own. That is when I'm trying to show that their situation is relatable and that they are not alone. Take the scenario with the broken heater. I could say, I understand how frustrating that can be. I know some people in the same situation, and that is a really tough place to be. In this response, I show empathy to the situation by comparing it to something similar without downplaying its importance. Sometimes comparing circumstances can help solve the problem. For example, when you're doing it in order to describe a situation another person used to fix the problem. For the person with the broken heater, it could be, I know someone who was in this situation, and this is what they did. Something like that is fine too. I bring this all back to my situation with Mitch. Why couldn't I have that validation that others receive? Why did it take my being on the verge of harming myself and having to go to an outpatient program to have people give me some sort of validation? Why couldn't anyone else tell me, Brandon, I know this is really painful for you. Even though you didn't go about it the right way, all you wanted was to make peace with Mitch so that you could have some closure. This all started because you wanted friends and you thought he could become friends with you. You are not wrong for thinking that. I know you want to set things right with him, and a lot of what happened was a misunderstanding. However, his acknowledgement of this is a call he has to make. Even though there's validation in what you want to do, he doesn't want to talk to you. Unfortunately, as hard and unfair as that decision feels to you, it has to be respected. Maybe there'll come a time when Mitch wants to reach out to you again, but unfortunately, that's not now. That doesn't mean it has to be over. Maybe we can work with you on finding ways to make other friends, etc. But I can't fully blame those people involved in the situation for not saying something along those lines. Most people in society wouldn't say this. That's the issue. How come, as a society, we only share empathy for situations that we individually deem as important or serious? Naturally, we'd be more receptive to an understanding of something that seems like a big deal in our own eyes. But that's not good enough. Again, had it not been for the mystery person and the outpatient program, I truly don't know how I would have made it out of this situation. It was clearly a big deal to me. Nobody has the right to say otherwise. While it was only a drop in the bucket of minimized situations in my life, the situation with Mitch was the one that affected me the most deeply by far. A big part of this layer is to say that when someone is going through a hard time, show kindness and compassion. If someone that you know is doing something that is wrong, you'll have much better luck getting through to them if you try to put yourself in their shoes. Doing so is not to tell them that what they're doing is okay and that they should continue. It is just so that they know that they are understood, which will make it more likely for them to listen to reason. Now let's talk about famous sayings. You know something? I was really looking forward to this portion of the book. If you feel that there's a hint of sarcasm intended with those quotation marks around famous, you'd be correct. These are the comments that I hear people say or that I've been told when dealing with a challenging situation. I can't wait to tear them apart like a shredder shreds paper. Again, the scenario is dealing with an issue that caused you distress. Fair warning, there will be a vast amount of bluntness in here. Let's begin, shall we? It's time to man up. I love hearing this quote. It's actually really useful to hear. If you want to beat someone when they're down, this is the perfect thing to say. If it isn't obvious yet, I'm being very sarcastic. We have to work through this. We have to own up to what we've done. You need to take responsibility. Any of these last three comments are better than telling someone, especially a guy, to man up. Why not just tell them that they're being a big crybaby and a coward? While the need to increase independence and responsibility in today's society is very much prevalent, it is really not helped by using that disgusting quote. Complaining isn't going to help. Hey, newsflash, sometimes people need a vent. Sometimes people need to process. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I'll be honest, this one isn't as cut and dry. Oftentimes, children actually may need to be taught this in a way, especially when testing boundaries and needing to know that no means no. This comment caters more to adults when talking to their buddies or peers about something that is bothering them. They know complaining isn't going to help. Cut that nonsense quote and try giving or helping them to get some sort of solution to whatever their problem is. Stop throwing a pity party. Again, going back to what I said for the last quote, people need time to process and vent. That pity party, along with support from people around them, can be the difference between someone wanting to hurt themselves or being helped to work through their problem in a kind way. Do I deny that sometimes people may have these moments for the sake of getting attention? Not at all. But then I ask myself, why? How down do they feel about themselves and their own self-worth that they need to gain attention that way? The only time I'm really against a pity party is when people are looking to get items such as money or other valuables from people. Just let it go. This is such a cop-out phrase, it's ridiculous. What an easy way to get out of dealing with someone's situation. There's a part of me that wants to say that it'd be better to just tell the person you don't want to deal with or be involved in their situation. That may be an exaggeration, but this really is a terrible thing to say to someone, especially when they're at the peak of their frustration. Don't get me wrong, forgiveness is key. Being able to work through a problem and accept things the way they are is sometimes necessary in order to grow. But the verbiage of just let it go can come across as implying it's easy to do so. Whenever something really bothers us, which can be a plethora of different things, it's very hard to just let it go. Sometimes, like, this is really tough, but we have to accept the situation for what it is so much better and so much less minimizing. Just move on, or just gotta get past it. Same exact concept as just let it go. Now it's time to just move on to the next famous saying, because eventually we just got to get past this layer. I'm known for my terribly annoying dad jokes, by the way. At some point, you have to move on. Okay, while it may be very much true that being able to persevere through a challenging and traumatic experience is ideal and oftentimes necessary in order to grow and live your life, one cannot put a time limit on that. Even though the verbiage acknowledges this must happen at some point, it heavily implies that that point should happen sooner than later. Truth be told, this phrase does not anger me quite as much as the others because there is a subtle hint of understanding that the situation is still bothering the person. However, it's still being discussed for a reason. Sometimes, to work through a problem, it takes slow and careful baby steps. And usually, those baby steps take a lot longer than the people that are around the person experiencing the problem care to wait for. There has to be understanding that these take time. Of course, if someone is upset to the point where it affects their job and ability to take care of themselves, yes, this happened to me, as hard and as burdensome as it is, sometimes taking a step back is the best way to take 2 steps forward. All that aside, it is very well understood that being upset or depressed about something for a long period of time is never ideal. I usually try to use the verbiage such as, I get this is still bothering you, but for the sake of your well-being, your job, etc., we need to work on working through this. Sometimes I'll add, we'll help you do that. Problems are not fun to go through alone, after all. Just forget about it. To the best of my knowledge, just forgetting about something isn't really possible. You don't just forget about something. It takes time, support, and processing to really be able to move on from a situation. Even then, depending on how big the situation was to the person dealing with it, not based on what society thinks. They may never forget about it. They just get better at coping with it. Well, that's life. This is such an overused and overrated thing to say. It offers no solution, relief, or support. I get it. Life can be hard, and things will happen that are hard and that are out of our control. It is important to know that for sure. In my last book, I quoted someone that said this to me, but they followed it up with a beautiful statement about how people with autism have something special to offer, so I gave it a pass. But in general, saying this can leave people feeling just as bad, if not worse than before. Well, that sucks. People do use this one more or less to validate someone's frustration, which is good. But this should only be used when it is able to be determined that someone is venting about something that they themselves deem as a small issue. For example, person 1. Darn, my pen ran out of ink. Facial expression isn't really showing deep frustration. They have access to another pen, and the reason for using the pen isn't extremely urgent. After assessing that, person 2, well, that sucks. If that scenario was something that was more severe, the person saying, well, that sucks, can come across to them as you're thinking that their situation is small. If you think about it, it makes sense. Person 1, Oh no, a person I just knew passed away. Person 1 is in tears. Person 2, well, that sucks. You see how that doesn't really work? Oh, everyone goes through that. In all seriousness, this can be used either in a good way or in one of the most minimizing ways possible. If someone is beating themselves up about a mistake they made or they feel down about their own accomplishments, using the everybody statement in whatever variation can very much come across as, hey, don't beat yourself up over this. That's perfectly fine depending on the scenario. However, the moment it is used to compare a situation, it can imply it's not that big of a deal. Everyone goes through that or feels that way. That is by far one of the most irritating statements I've been told, especially in my adolescence. I am not everyone. I am Brandon Adjoumani. Other people have it much worse. Literally half of what this layer talked about. You'll be fine, you'll get through this, you'll be okay, etc. Again, these can be very well-meaning. People often use these to help a person realize that there is light at the end of the tunnel. But when a person is going through something that is really having a major impact on them, it can come across as invalidating their situation. You telling them that they will be fine might make them feel as if you are making what they are going through seem less significant. No one owes you anything. Really? Not even $1 million? Oh, I really loathe this quote. This was used heavily during the struggle with Mitch. My wanting to make things right with him had nothing to do with feeling entitled or privileged. If anything, I felt so low, I felt that I needed to make things right just to be at peace and feel a little bit better about myself. For the most part, people are aware that they are not owed anything. It still doesn't make it hurt any less when they are feeling that there is an injustice or imbalance in their life. For anyone that has used these sayings before, I am not intending to disparage anyone despite my heavy bluntness. 2 things. 1, when I write, I get very passionate and very blunt, if you cannot already tell. 2, hey, sometimes the reader likes a little bluntness. Breaking the fourth wall a little bit. But in all seriousness, these are phrases society has used over and over. It has been adapted and normalized. I get it. I also get the meaning and intent behind the usage. But these phrases, quotes, sayings, or anything else I call them in this layer, as well as so many others that I didn't even mention, really can make a situation much worse. I'm not implying that the truth should be sugar-coated, but it should be done in a compassionate, understanding, and perspective-taking manner. Yelling and losing composure with harsh language isn't always going to work. And the only reason I say always is because I know there are times where a kick of the pants is needed. But even those are on a case-by-case basis. Now, I'll be honest, I can't sit here and make it seem like I'm perfect and never get mad. I also cannot tell you how many times I wanted to downplay someone's situation that seemed agonizingly trivial. But then I have to take a step back and remember how I would feel when my situations were minimized. It is important to note that sometimes some of these phrases are used when people don't know what else to say to find a solution in the situation. I can tell you firsthand that not every situation a person is coming to you with needs a solution. Sometimes that person just needs a good listener. Saying something like, I'm sorry you're dealing with this, I wish I knew a way to help you, can go a long way. Even adding in that you'll still be there to support them can help as well. It's certainly better than using the phrases from above. Sometimes people just need to talk and let it out. Another thing that can be triggering for me is the word busy. Let me explain. The word itself doesn't affect me in the slightest. It's the way it's used. Since I was young, I wanted to hang out with people. A phrase I heard that has now become a trigger for me is, I'm too busy. Whether it's with peers, families that I work with, or others in general. Whether they say they are too busy or I don't have time, it brings back old memories. These were memories from individuals from my high school that I try to keep in touch with, saying that they were too busy. Mitch saying he was too busy, and so on. It was just too much. I don't blame anyone for saying this. You know, it is what it is. If they're busy, they're busy. I just feel like such a burden when I ask to do things and everyone is always too busy. I feel like I'm bothering them. Truth be told, this is part of the reason I'm working on a doctorate degree. Yes, I'm working on a doctorate, which I will touch more upon later in the book. Part of the thing is I want to look like I have a life as well. Much to my mother's disapproval, which is very understandable, I go out of my way to take on a lot of tasks, whether it be volunteering, multiple jobs, being in school, to the point of borderline exhaustion. A big part of that is also so I can remain busy and not feel like a burden on anyone. This lifestyle took place towards the end of 2014 when my dependence on keeping in touch with former classmates from high school as a means of being busy ultimately went downhill. Of course, that's far from the only reason I do what I do to stay busy, but it's still pretty sad. On Saturdays, people do fun things in the evening where I do not. Well, that's enough about this layer. Let's move on to another huge layer in my life.